Here's a couple of things that we plan to go over today. So we're going to go over the definition of a virtual interview, the benefits of interviewing virtually, preparing for the virtual interview or just interviews in general, the overall purpose of any interview, why do we even have them, what to expect in a virtual interview, and interviewing tips and etiquette. We'll have virtual specific interview tips. We'll have tips for telephone interviewing, and then we'll answer some questions, some commonly asked questions. And so this is when I'll ask for your feedback and what you are normally saying in your interviews. And so I'll ask for your feedback at that time. And then asking employer questions, we should always have some employer questions to ask them as well. And then we'll talk a little bit about sending a thank you note and what's included in a thank you note. And then at the end, if you have any other questions, we'll address those at that point. All right, so what is a virtual interview? So a virtual interview is an interview that takes place remotely. So it's not in person. So it's basically the opposite of an in-person interview. It takes place remotely, sometimes over the phone, but often using technology like video conferencing and other online communication platforms, such as what we're using today, MS Teams, Zoom, WebEx, there's Google Meets, there's some other ones out there as well. But just interviewing, not in person, remotely. All right, so what is the purpose of an interview? Whether it's a virtual interview or it's an interview in person, one of the purposes of interviewing is to meet that employer in person, by phone or virtually. So basically you get the opportunity to meet that employer. So that's one of the purposes of an interview. Another purpose is to learn about the position and the employer. So we obviously want to learn about the job that we potentially will get, but we also want to learn about that employer. So that's another purpose. Opportunity to sell our strengths and skills as they relate to the employer and the position. So this is the crux of any interview, is your opportunity to get a chance to sell yourself to that company with your strengths, your skills, and your work experience. And we want to try to relate that to whatever job we're applying for. And then last but not least, assess if the employer/position are a good fit for your career goals, values, and needs. So oftentimes when we get an invitation to an interview, we think that that employer is going to be examining us. But this is also an opportunity for us to examine that employer to make sure it's a good fit for us, because not every job is a good fit for us. So we want to make sure that we're examining that as well. All right, so here are some benefits of a virtual interview. Obviously, we can't do in-person interviews right now because of the pandemic that we're in. So one of the benefits of a virtual interview is that we prevent the spread of COVID. Another benefit is it's convenient, less preparation for both parties. So in-person interviews, there's a little bit more preparation when you're doing an in-person interview. You know, for the candidate, you have to find out where the office building is located, if it's a suite. You just have a little bit more preparation. And on the potential employer side, they have to oftentimes schedule a conference room or making sure that all of the parties are going to be at the location at the same time. So it's a lot of coordination on the potential employer's side as well. One of the benefits of the virtual interview also is that candidates are more comfortable because they're in their own environment. So they're often a little bit more comfortable than if they had to go to a conference room. Also helps accommodate a variety of schedules. So because you don't necessarily have to have everyone in one place, you can accommodate a lot of schedules. And so, you know, from the potential employer side of things, you can work right up until the time that you have to go and log on to your virtual interview and conduct it. So you could be working in your office and then conduct the virtual interview. So it's a lot of benefits from that. Also, it can allow employers to speak to candidates all over the world. So you're not relegated to just looking for someone locally. You can look for your talent all over the world. And it's less expensive for employers during their screening process. So especially during the initial stages of any screening process, you you don't want to spend a lot of money when you have 100, 200 applicants for any position. And what if you had to fly in 5 or 6 of those candidates to your place? You would have to pay for airfare, you'd have to pay for hotel accommodations, and if it's a big organization, you may have to even pay for per diem. So the virtual interviews have kind of alleviated that cost. I think, after the second or third interview, that might be the time when the employer is getting a little bit more serious about the candidate. So then at that point, maybe they'll fly in a person or two. But initially, you don't want to do that. So the virtual interview kind of takes place, and that's a benefit for employers as well. What to expect in a virtual interview. So whether it's in person or virtual, these are some things that you can expect to have in interviews in general. More and more times than not, you're likely to see a group interview nowadays. So it could potentially be one person, but typically it's going to be 2 to 3 or 4 or 5 people interviewing you at one time. So that's something that you need to be cognizant of, and also learn how to address each individual person by their name. And so with the virtual interview, it's fairly easy, because usually you'll have their screen names, posted wherever their icon is or their picture is, so you can address them by their name. But in-person interviews, you can't do that. So it's typically when they introduce themselves, you would write their names down so that you can still address them individually. That's what you want to do. Another thing to expect is that your conversation skills are the main focus. So ideally, you want to make sure that your interviews are more of a conversation than they fire off a question, you answer the question. They fire off another question, you answer the question. You want to try to make sure that your interview is more of a conversation. Yes, they're going to ask their questions, but you want to make sure that it's more of a conversation. And it's a little bit more difficult in the virtual environment, but this is what your goal should be, is to make sure that it's more of a conversation. And I'll teach you some things about that a little later on. Ability to verbally convey your skills and qualifications. This will be examined closely. So again, this is one of the goals of an interview, any type of interview, is to be able to convey those skills and show how your skills match up with the job description that you're applying for. And then the last one is the lack of physical cues will guide the length of strength of your answers. So in a virtual interview, typically you'll only have a picture that goes from maybe your neck up. So you're not able to see the verbal cues from the people that are interviewing you. So you can't see if they're folding their hands, which is something that maybe they're shutting you off. You can't see if they're doodling on their paper. You can't get those verbal cues. You can't see those things. So your answers might depend on how the lack of the verbal cues. So because you don't have those verbal cues, you might have a short answer. But if you did have the benefit of the verbal cues, you might have a longer answer, because you're thinking, okay, they're engaged into my answer. Maybe they're leaning forward. If I was in an in-person interview, you can see that they're leaning forward. They're more engaged into your answers. Maybe you give a lengthier answer in that case. All right, preparing for the interview. So this is where the real work goes. So from the beginning of the time that you get invited to an interview, they're either going to email you or they're going to call you on the phone and they're going to invite you to an interview. So this is when your preparation should start at this point. The first thing that you want to make sure that you know is what virtual platform will you be using? Will you be using Zoom? Will you be using Microsoft Teams, WebEx, or whatever it is? You want to try to get this information right away. This way, once you get this information, it's going to allow you a chance to practice using those different virtual environments. So you want to try to get that information right away. You want to get the names of the individuals that'll be interviewing you. Hopefully you can get these names, and this is the reason why. Majority of professionals in the world have what we call a LinkedIn account. And so if you can get the names of the individuals that will be interviewing you, this is just a little nugget of information you can get from their LinkedIn accounts. You can get where they went to college. You can get where they maybe worked before. And then you can use this, or you can slide this into your conversation when you're having your interview. So you could say something like, oh, I see, Mrs. Johnson, that you went to the University of Oklahoma. My cousin went to the University of Oklahoma. That's how you get in your interview into a conversation piece. Or you can say, I see that you worked at Caesar's Palace. My dad worked at Caesar's Palace for 20 years. Now you're making that connection, and you're making your interview into more of a conversation, and that's the goal of it all. So that's why you want to get the individual's names so that you can get some information on them. Now, the next one, gather information from the company's website. Every company nowadays will probably have a website. They're going to have a category called About Me or About Us or Just About. And in this area, they're going to have information like where was the company founded, when was it founded, who founded it, what projects they're working on, what products they're selling. This is also some good information that you can slide into your interview when you're talking about the job. You can say, I know that you're opening up a new building in Dubai or what have you. And so you can have a little bit more of a conversation piece in that way. So you want to read their About Us information on their website. Another neat tip is to follow the company in their various social media sites. Now, this is a good thing because when you're following people on their social media sites, you can get job alerts. So say there's a company that you love to work for, say Tesla or what have you. You can go to Tesla's social media site. You can like their site and start to follow them. Then they'll start to send you just different information about their company. So this is, again, something that you can use within your interview. Or if they start to send you job leads, or you can see that maybe they have an Employee of the Month program, and you can slide that into your interview saying, oh, I saw that Miss Lily was Employee of the Month last year. I think that's a really good thing that you do for your employees. There's another way of just sliding in some information about a company. And what this really does is shows that the employer that you've really done your research, you're prepared, you know a lot about their company, and that's really flattering for a company, and that'll go a long way in your interview. So you want to do this preparation. It'll really pay off for you in the long run. You also want to learn everything you can about the position and study the job description. So the reason why you want to study their job description, because you want to use the same jargon that they use within their organization. So say you're applying for a administrative assistant position, but they list in their advertisement that they want someone that can do 10 key, but you're accustomed to saying data entry. But you can slide this answer within your within your interview to say, I'm fairly versed with in 10 key. Now you're talking their language. That goes a long way as well. And again, find out who will be interviewing you. All right, so here is some interview tips and etiquettes that you can use to really help you have a smooth virtual interview. The first one, make sure that you're on time. You should log in at least about 5 minutes early before everybody else gets there, before the time of the scheduled interview. So you want to get in there. You want to make sure that you're testing your camera, testing your internet connection, all of those things, making sure that your microphone works. You want to do all that stuff in the first 5 minutes. Make sure yourself is centered in front of your camera. You want to do that before anyone else gets in there. So at least 5 minutes early. You want to be nice and courteous to everyone. So this is true for when you're doing in-person interviews and interviews virtually. You want to be nice to everyone and courteous. And so you always want to introduce yourself. So virtually you won't have the benefit of shaking someone's hand, but it's also, even though they do know your name already, you would also express yourself saying, hello, I'm Tommy French, or how do you do? How are you doing? You always want to do that at the beginning of your interview. You also want to sit up straight in your seat. This kind of just puts you in that mode and that thought process of you're in an interview, actual interview. And so you want to treat your virtual interviews just like they are in-person interviews. So you want to sit up straight. It's going to put you in that mind frame that you're in an interview now. So that's a good thing to do. You want to maintain good eye contact. That's true for in-person interviews. The way you would maintain eye contact in this virtual environment is making sure that you're centered in front of your camera and you're looking right at the camera. At the end of the interview, you want to make sure you thank them for the time. Thank you for your time and consideration. And then last but not least, make sure that you're writing that thank you letter. And we'll talk a little bit about that later, the importance of that. All right, here's some more virtual interview tips. These are more specific to virtual interviewing. You want to find a nice, quiet location in your house, apartment, or what have you, but you want to find a nice place where hopefully you don't have any distractions. Now, what happens if you have a distraction? Because things happen, you might have your kids at home or someone walks in. One of the things you can do if you have the opportunity to do it is if you're going to say, your virtual interview spot is in your room, you can maybe put on the outside of the door, interviewing, please don't enter. But in the event that someone does come into your interviewing space, what you can do is kindly excuse yourself, turn off your mic, turn off your camera, and then address the problem. Don't just say, hey, yell and that's just not professional, and that's not going to put you in the best light. So just excuse yourself, turn off your camera, turn off your mic, and then go address the problem, and then come back. And then get right back into your interview. Like I said before, make sure you test your technology the day before. Make sure that microphone is working, your speaker, and your internet connection is strong so that you're not freezing up or they're not able to hear, half of your answer or what have you. You also want to adjust your camera so that you're centered. You don't want to be off to one side or the other. You want to make sure that you're centered right in front of your camera. Your background and your lighting. So the optimal background, so the best background you should have is either have like a plain, preferably like a white wall behind you, or most of the virtual environments have some type of blur feature. So you use those. You don't want to use any background that's going to be too busy or something like that, because that's taken from what you're saying in the content of your interview. So you want to make sure that it is plain as you can. So a white wall is best, or the blur feature. And with your lighting, I don't know. I mean, if you have one of those circle lights, that's the best that they kind of use in the movie industry and all that stuff. But if you don't have that, natural light is the best because it doesn't have shadows or it doesn't have direction. So if you can have some sunlight come into your interviewing space, that's better. But if you don't have that situation, then a light, don't have it shining directly on you, but have it on, but don't have it directly on you. Make sure that you know how to share your screen. So this is part of your practicing and knowing what type of virtual format or platform you're going to be using. Sometimes they're going to ask you to do a presentation. So you need to know at least how to share your screen. Or you might have to share your resume with someone that doesn't have it at their place. So you need to be able to share your screen. And one of the things that it's a good practice is that when you're sharing your screen, that you don't have other windows open. This is not a good thing. Maybe you were just searching on Amazon for some shoes or something like that, and you don't want to accidentally share that screen when you were trying to share your resume. So you want to close all your screens, just have open what you need to have open at that time. And then dress for success. So again, we want to try to treat this exactly like it is an in-person interview. So you need to dress just like you would in an in-person interview. So that means top and bottom. Just because you think that the camera is going to be on your top portion of your body and they're not going to really necessarily see the bottom, that's most of the time that might be true, but you just never know. If you had to go address someone that was a distraction of yours and then you have to stand up, then you don't have on the same matching thing. Also, when you're dressing for an interview, again, it puts you in that mindset that you're in a virtual interview or in-person interview. So it's putting you in that mind state. So you want to dress professionally in that. And so basically you want to just think conservative when you're dressing for an interview. So if it's a shirt and tie, a suit and tie, make sure you have the pants on, everything, go all the way down to the shoes, just to put yourself in that mind state that you're in an interview. And then monitor your body language. Obviously, if you're slouching down in your chair, those potential employers can deduct something from that. Meaning, if you're slouched down in your chair, they can assume that you're a lazy person. So maybe I won't hire this person because they're lazy and they're slouched down in their chair. Whether that's fair or not, that's what they can get from that. Also, your voice inflection is not going to be as strong if you're slouched down in your chair versus you sitting up straight. So just kind of keep that in mind. All right, so another part of the virtual interviewing is a telephone interview. So some of the same things apply from the virtual platforms on the computer as apply for the telephone interviewing. A couple things are different though. Number one, you want to speak directly into the phone and you want to keep the mouthpiece about 1 inch away from your mouth in that case. You don't want it too close because it seems like it's kind of blurred or muffled, and you don't want to have it too far away. So about 1 inch is about right. Again, just like in a virtual interview, as far as a virtual platform interview, Zoom or what have you, you want to find a close, quiet space that you can do your phone interview, free from distractions again. Do not eat food, chew gum, smoke during your interview. Even though you won't be on camera, it's still not appropriate, and you can get caught between questions if you're eating something or chewing something, and that can come through the telephone if you're chewing like gum or something like that. So you want to treat it just like it's an in-person interview. You wouldn't do that in an in-person interview, should not do it in a telephone interview as well. You should also have a copy of your resume and references in front of you. That way that you can reference those things. So typically, you can maybe have to talk about different dates that you've worked somewhere or where you were in school at a certain time. So instead of maybe recalling that from your memory, you would have that in front of you because you have your resume in front of you. Smile over the phone. Obviously, if you're smiling, that can come through the phone. They can tell that you're smiling versus someone that is not smiling while they're talking. I know it kind of sounds silly, but it is true. If you're smiling, and again, it puts you in that mind frame that you're in a positive mood, and that positivity comes across even in a telephone interview. Pretend that the person is right in front of you. So, like I've said several times tonight, we want to pretend like this is an in-person interview. So you want to do the same thing. And so you want to stay as formal as you can. Just because it's an at-home interview, you want to stay as formal as you can and go with that. And avoid discussing salaries and benefits until the second interview. I don't know if all of you knew that, but discussions of salaries and benefits should not be discussed in your first interview. You need to leave that to your second interview or even your third interview. Eventually, the company will discuss it. I think it's appropriate in your second interview. If they don't discuss it, you can bring it up at that point. But do not bring up salaries and benefits in the first interview. It's assumed that they're going to have to pay you and probably provide you with benefits. So they'll get to that part. What I have listed up here is a couple of commonly asked questions on an interview. So the first thing I want you to do is, my first question is, have you been on an interview, whether it's virtual or in person? All right, so the first one, and this is a commonly asked question, is tell me about yourself. I'll give you what you should be answering to this question. So what they are not asking, and it kind of implies that they are not asking about anything personal in your life. What this question should be relegated to is your education, your work experience, and how that relates to the job that you're applying for. Now, if you do want to add something personal, make sure it's not too personal. But that's not what they're asking for. They're asking for what your education is, even though it's listed on your resume. You don't want to say, well, it's on my resume. No, you want to tell them about your education, tell them about your work experience as it relates to that position. Another question that they ask is, why should we hire you? So with this question, why should we hire you? Again, pretty much along the same lines. You should talk about your skills and your experience and how those things relate to the specific job. So you want to say, I am bilingual. I can type, 55 words per minute. I have worked at Caesar's Palace for 10 years in this area for the position that you're looking to hire for. Something like that. So you just bring it all back together, and that's how you would answer that question. So these are kind of open-ended questions that make people nervous when they have to answer them. So this is kind of what you want to relegate it to. So skills, your strengths, and how it relates to that job. It's why would they want to hire you? Why do you want to work for this company? With this one, basically you want to make sure that you can tell them how you're going to help the company succeed. So you may talk about, well, I have experience in sales, and I was able to help my other company sell 2 million bicycles, and this is how I plan to help you reach your goals at your company. You want to tell them about your successes, how you're going to help them succeed, how you're going to make their company better, and how you're going to fit in to their company culture. Those are things that you want to put in there. What about the old faded strengths and weaknesses? So the strengths and weaknesses, obviously we all have some form of strengths. What we need to do is choose the strengths that are going to be related to the job and use those. So whatever your strengths are, if you're a dependable person, or if you're a hard worker, or you're good with teamwork, you don't just want to list your strengths. You need to elaborate on each one of your strengths. So if you say that you're dependable, you can't just say I'm dependable. You got to give an example, real life example of why you feel that you're dependable. So something like, I haven't missed work in 2 years. I got Employee of the Month for or perfect attendance for the last 2 years. Something like that shows your dependability. So that's more than just you saying you're dependable. Or you excel with teamwork. Maybe talk about a situation that you worked in a team and maybe you were the team leader and it was a successful project. Those are things you're going to express as far as your strengths, but you need to elaborate on it. Just don't give out one word answers to that. Tell them why you are that. That is one of your strengths. Now with the weakness, this one is a little bit more difficult for us. And so sometimes we get nervous and we blurt out our worst trait. And that's not what we want to do in this situation. So with your strengths, they typically tell you to pick a strength and then kind of reverse it so it looks like it's or pick a weakness and reverse it and so it looks like a strength. So I care too much, so that looks like that's a strength. Or I work too hard, so I take my work home with me. And you can answer that way. You can answer that way. So you can pick out a weakness and make it and portray it like it is a strength. But the other way that you can answer this question is you can pick out a limited, not one of your worst strengths or weaknesses, but one of your weaknesses that is not so bad, and show how you overcome that to make it a strength of yours. So one of the ones that I always talk about is, I would say that I used to be disorganized, but what I did through my times and working at it, I was able to get agendas. I make lists of things I need to get accomplished. I use certain apps. So now I'm not as disorganized as I once was before. I'm very good at it now. So now you listed a weakness, what they asked you for, but you told them how you overcame that. And so no longer is it a weakness really. And that's a good way to answer that question as well. Why are you interested in this position? So with this one, you want to kind of explain something specific that you're interested in the job. So you may say, well, I'm interested in this position because I have worked in this area for 3 years. I always want to work for your organization. And so that's why I'm applying for this position. Companies always like to know that you've done some research on them. Companies want you to want to work for them other than the money that they will be paying you. They would like to know that you're there really because of their organization. So anytime you can slide that part in there, that's going to be good for you. What does teamwork mean to you? So this is a time where you can talk about a situation, whether it was even in your past or what have you, but most jobs are going to require that you work in some type of group situation. So with teamwork, you're going to just tell them about a situation where you were working with a team, and you're going to tell how you contributed to that team, whether you were the leader or you were a strong contributor to that team, and how that team worked out. For me, I played sports, So I've always worked in team situations. So when I'm answering this question, I will start off with my sports background. And so playing basketball, I was the captain of my team. I was always able to recognize everyone's strengths and weaknesses within our team organization and use them accordingly. I also do that in my professional life. That could be an answer for you, that you related to something totally unrelated to professional, but you can bring it back to just letting them know that you can work in a team environment. How do you work under pressure? So first of all, you want to make sure that you let the interviewer know that you can handle pressure. So that might be the first thing you can say is I work well under pressure. And if you don't work well under pressure, say I work okay under pressure. You want to maybe talk about a situation where you were under some pressure and you overcame that situation and it came out to be a positive situation for you. So you want to say something like, I remember I had to step in for my boss or my supervisor, and I was under a severe time crunch, but I was able to get the product off the ground, and we were successful in solidifying the product or what have you. So this is something that you overcome in that situation. So you told them that you can handle the pressure. You told them about a scenario that you were in, and you answered the question and how you overcame that. Now, sample behavior questions. So these are more scenario type questions. And so what they're looking for in these questions are how you would handle a scenario and give some examples of how you would handle those scenarios. So the teamwork one we've already kind of went over. Utilize a situation where you've been on a team and how that team was successful in some way. So hopefully you have a story or some type of anecdote that you can use to show that you're good with teamwork. Another one they have on here is give an example of a challenge you experienced and how you dealt with that challenge. Kind of like working under pressure, you want to talk about a challenging situation that you had and how you overcame that situation. So you want to try to think of these things ahead of time. When you talk about a difficult situation, you want to talk about it ahead of time and then relay it into the interview. So you might talk about a time where you had a really tight deadline and you overcame it and you got it done in that tight deadline. You want to talk about that. If you saw a coworker stealing items from an employer, what would you do? Wow. So this is a question where that employer or that potential employer is looking to see if you are going to be loyal to them. So this is not necessarily a question about you snitching on your coworker or what have you. The employer wants to know, where your loyalty lies. And I dare say, if a coworker is stealing in front of you, they're putting you in a position that you don't want to be in. And, the company that you work for and is paying you, that's probably where your loyalty should lie anyway. So what you should do is tell them, and I firmly believe in this. I believe in personal responsibility. So if this was me, and this is kind of how I answer this question, I would say that I would go to that person and tell them not to stop stealing from the company. Now, at that point, if they say, "Hey, I'm still going to do it," then you go to HR, or you even tell them, "Okay, well then I'm going to go to HR and let them know." Another way to handle it is that you don't even address the person at all. You just go to HR and tell them what you saw. And again, don't view this as snitching. That person is not doing the right thing. and they're exposing you to it where both of you could get in trouble at some point. So that person is really not your friend in that respect. So I would confront the person, not confront them, but I would let them know, you really shouldn't be doing that, and try to stop them. And if not, I would tell them I'm going to go to HR. So that's how you should answer that question. And then in the same realm, the last one, if you're having an issue with a fellow coworker, what should you do? And also, the way I answer this question is I would go to that coworker and see if there was a way that we could work out whatever issue we're having. All the time we spend so much time with our coworkers that it's inevitable that we're going to have some issues eventually. So you go to that person, you try to rectify the issue, because really, as a professional, management doesn't want you to run to them every time you're having an issue with a coworker. So you try to resolve it first. If you can't resolve it, then you go to a manager. You elevate it at that point. All right, so those are some commonly asked questions and how you can handle those in an interview situation. Okay, so once you get towards the end of your interview, the potential employer is going to ask you, do you have any questions? And so you should always have a couple questions prepared to ask them. It just shows that you're prepared, also shows that you're very interested in their company, which is something that you want to portray in your interview. So here are some questions that you can ask. What is a typical day like? This is typically, they'll laugh at this question because there's usually, no matter what kind of job, there's no typical day. But, it gives them an opportunity to attempt to tell you what a typical day is like. So that's a good question to ask. What types of skills and abilities are you looking for the position I seek to fill? So they can give you some things that they're looking for. You have an opportunity to tie it back in. So, oh wow, I have several of these skills that you're looking for. So that's great. Sounds like I might be a good fit for this job. So that's an opportunity for you to sell yourself just one more time. This is towards the end of the interview. When do you plan to decide about this position? So this is good information to know, because you want to know when they're going to make their decision. Also, it lets them know again that you're really interested in this position. Please tell me more about the role teams play here at the company. Like I said before, most companies now, they operate in teams, in committees. So they can tell you a little bit about that. Or the last one I have here is, what are two of the most specific challenges that a successful applicant will face in the first 6 months? So what are some challenges that an employee that gets this job will face in the first 6 months? So that's a question where you're portraying that you're forward thinking, you're thinking ahead, you're already kind of putting yourself in that job. That's a good question to ask. After your interview is concluded, I say even do this before the 24 hours if you can. You want to send a thank you note. The reason why I say even do it before 24 hours is because sometimes after the interviewing committee is interviewed all the candidates, they might make the decision right away. So you want to send this thank you note before they make the decision. This is just going to give you an opportunity for the committee to see your name one more time, maybe build a little bit rapport with them, and what I always do, because when you get an interview, you probably, at least for me, I always forget to say something that I meant to say in the interview. And this thank you note is a way that I could remember that thing that I meant to say in the interview, and I can put it on my thank you note. I forgot to mention in my interview that I do know how to create an Excel spreadsheet. And so maybe that's something I forgot to put on my interview or say in my interview. So you can put that in the thank you note. But you always want to acknowledge their participation in the interview, thank them for their time, and you look forward to hearing from them, and you feel that you would be a perfect fit for their organization, or you look forward to being part of their team, something like that. And so you would send an individual note to each person if you're going to do it by email, and you want to make them all different is what you want to do.